Hello and welcome. In this series, this is a new series, I'm going to be starting an engine swap on my truck. My truck here, 1985 F-150, regular cab, short bed. It's got the 5-liter fuel injected, and this was my grandfather's truck. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But for now, I'm doing this. This engine has 220,000 miles or so on it. Never been overhauled. It's original to the truck. The transmission is the AOD, and it's been overhauled once, and so I'm going to be changing that as well. So I'll kind of walk you through the decisions that I made and why I chose to do what I did, and we'll go from there. So to start off, I'm not a car expert and engine expert. I'm a do-it-yourselfer, so open to tips, but I'll talk you through as I go. Hopefully you learn something as we go through this series. Okay, so the reason I'm doing this, it's a 35-year-old engine. It's never been overhauled. It does not make great power. It runs fine, but I know that there's 35 years of gunk and stuff in there. Even though it's been regularly maintained, everything that I've opened up over the past several years, you can just tell. There's gunk in there, and I'm looking to increase the power, hopefully a little newer technology and some better gas mileage would be fine, but I don't drive it that much, so it's not that big of a deal. So let's start with what options I have. So I could redo the engine that's in there, just rebuild it as is. I can buy this motor from actually a lot of engine rebuilders. They still make this thing and rebuild it. It's pretty common. It would cost somewhere around $1,500 to $2,000 for the engine, and about $1,200 to $1,800 for the transmission overhauled. And I can put right back in there what it came with from the factory. My problem with doing that is the electronics in there. It was the first year that Ford made the electronic fuel injection. So they had some issues with it. It works fine, but it's getting old and parts are getting harder and harder to find. So it'd be nice to upgrade the electronics a little bit and get some more horsepower and all of that with it. Now, here's the big thing. I live in the state of California. So our great state and its infinite regulation limits a lot of what I can do. So I'll talk you through some of the options that I thought about and dreaming, as if I wasn't in the state of California. So my first thought was, wow, wouldn't it be so cool to put a 7.3 turbo diesel in that? Well, that obviously presents some challenges. One, that 7.3 was never made to go in a half-ton pickup. It weighs a whole lot more. I'd have to do a lot of work to make that work. Plus, there's the whole transferring over the whole fuel system and all of that. Not to mention the state of California won't let me do that. So there's an option of a 351, or I could put something else in here. So the state of California says I can change that out with anything, any engine that came stock in any vehicle, as long as really two conditions are met. Number one, it's 1985 or newer. So I can put anything that came in a vehicle 1985 or newer and that meets the same smog regulations that this truck does or better. So what that means is that I can put anything in a half-ton pickup or better, which means a car. So this took a lot of research. It's taken me a long time to figure out exactly what that means. So in California, you have to go to a referee that if you do anything outside of stock, the referee has to approve it. So what you would do is you take it to the referee, they approve that modification and put a sticker on your truck or your car, and then from there, you can get it smogged every 2 years at a normal smog shop. So when I asked the referee, well, what can I put in there? He said, well, it just has to be light duty truck or better. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, it's all based on the weight. I said, what does that mean? He didn't know. So he said it's based on the gross vehicle weight, the same weight or better. But the problem is this thing's got a gross vehicle weight of about 5,000 pounds. Well, you can get F-150s that are nearing 8,000 pound gross vehicle weight. This is a half-ton short bed. So if you got let's say a quad cab F-150, it's going to weigh a lot more than that. Gross vehicle weight is going to be a lot higher. So my question was, where is the line? Where do we draw that line? He didn't know. So I went and talked to a guy at my local office for the California Air Resources Board, CARB is what we call it, and he gave me some good information. Basically, it's a half-ton pickup. Anything that Ford made in a half-ton pickup, or really any manufacturer, or better, which means a car, that's what I can put in this. So that's kind of where I started. So I'll talk through some options that I looked at. Okay, so I think all of us Ford guys would love to put a 5.0 Coyote engine in one of these. That's great. Problem is my budget didn't allow for that. Even a wrecked one, those things are going for a lot of money. So I kept looking. Well, I could put a 5.4, which is part of the Ford modular engine family, along with the 4.6. And so I looked around. I even looked at the turbo, the EcoBoost, the turbocharged V6. Again, very expensive. And I'm not that versed in electronics, so I really didn't want to get too far into electronics and get in way over my head. So I started looking at more economical options. And by that, I meant I need a donor car. Anything that I'm going to change, I don't want to have to program computers or flash computers, so I wanted to get everything that I could swap right over into this, and something that was pretty compatible. So I started looking, and the most economical options that I found were in the 4.6 liter V8. Now Ford made that V8 forever. I think they started in 1992 in the Lincoln Continental, if I'm right. And it started out as the first generation of the Ford modular engine. It started with 4.6. The 5.4 is also in that, as is the V10 that they made. That went in some trucks and vans and like the excursion type stuff. So I started looking, and the 4.6 is available in a lot of vehicles. Every cop car, well, every Crown Vic has one, and it also came in the Mercury Grand Marquis and the, what's the other one? The Lincoln Town Car. So I started looking around, and then I found that Ford made a dual overhead cam version of that, which bumps the horsepower to about 290 horsepower. Just for reference, this thing stock from the factory, 185 horsepower. So in looking, I started kind of wanting to find one of those dual overhead cams. Now there's issues with that 4.6, and this may not be the right option for you. One of the issues is its torque is pretty low in the lower RPM range. You have to spin it up pretty quick to get torque and the horsepower out of it, which is unusual for a V8, but the way I understand it, it's because it's a relatively square engine, meaning that both the bore and the stroke of the piston and cylinder is about the same. It's almost exactly the same, which limits the low end torque. And if you were towing something regularly with a truck like this, the 4.6 might not be the best option for you. I don't really tow much though. Just a handful of times a year. It's not a big deal. So the donor car was the way to go. And I ended up with a 4.6 liter dual overhead cam along with a 4R70W transmission, which is the same thing as the AOD, I think, we're going to find out, except that it's an electronic controlled transmission as opposed to a manual one. So this is my donor car. This is a 1993 Lincoln Mark VIII, and As you can see, I've already started to part it out, selling some of the things, the parts online, and trying to recoup my purchase price. So I was able to buy this car for a total of $800. It has 109,000 miles on it, and it has the 4.6 dual overhead cam V8, the first year that Ford made that dual overhead cam, and this was also the first year of the Lincoln Mark VIII. So hopefully this will be the new heart to my truck. So there's the engine that's going to come out of this donor car. It's the 4-valve 4.6 liter V8. Well, the displacement's obviously less than the 5.0. It's the height and width, correction, the height and length are good, but the width is significantly, like 13 inches wider, or thereabouts. So that'll be the tight spot. But there she is. So stay tuned and follow me along as I work my way through this engine swap process. Like I said, I'm not a professional, just a hobbyist, and I'm learning as I go. So hopefully you can come along and learn with me.